General Hospital spoilers reveal that Rick and Nina are no longer just supporting characters in this legal battle. They have become the true masterminds, meticulously plotting a ruthless strategy to push Michael into the deepest dark of his downfall. Rick, with his experience and the coldness of a lawyer who has faced every type of character, is using the courtroom as a stage, with each question not only aiming to uncover the truth but also serving as a psychological strike against the moral image Michael had carefully built before the judge and the community. Nina, who has always acted out of love for Willow and a desire to reclaim her role as a mother, has now become a dangerous pawn in the power game. No longer hesitant or secretive, she subtly feeds information, suggests strategies, and urges Rick to uncover the truth she believes will help Willow win, exposing Michael Corinthos. At the center of this storm is the secret of Michael's affair with Sasha, an affair that Michael himself buried, trying to conceal it behind the facade of a devoted father and a virtuous husband. But the truth has been peeled back layer by layer. Photos, messages, and even video footage of Michael and Sasha at a secret resort in Europe. Everything was presented by Rick in the trial like the final nails in the coffin of Michael's honor. The whispers in the public that were once mere rumors are now reality, laid bare before the judge and all of Port Charles. As Michael panics, trying to keep his composure, while Diane struggles to protect him from the public and legal backlash, Sasha, who had been hurt by him, stands at a crossroads she cannot retreat from. She could remain silent and let things unfold in Michael's favor, or step into the light and completely dismantle Rick and Nina's strategy. And then, in that moment, an emotional rise happens within Sasha. She decides to act. No one in the courtroom expected Sasha to be the one to turn the tide. She steps up to the witness stand not to exonerate herself, but to stop the wave of accusations drowning Michael. She admits the affair with Michael but also reveals that everything happened when both of them were lost and suffering. More importantly, Sasha declares that Michael never abandoned her, and it was he who first suggested she keep the child, not for reputation, but out of responsibility. In a bold move, Sasha presents a letter written by Michael during the time she was pregnant, clearly expressing his desire to provide for, care for, and be a part of the child's life. And then, what shocks even more is when Sasha redirects the entire story toward Nina and Rick. She reveals that, before the trial, Nina had approached her, pressuring her to reveal the truth. But what Nina didn't expect was that Sasha was no longer the weak, easily manipulated woman she once was. Sasha testifies that she knew about Nina and Drew's relationship, secret meetings, overnight stays at the old Corinthos hotel. All of this was contrary to what Drew had been portraying in public, and if exposed, it would severely damage the reputation of Willow, Drew's current girlfriend. Sasha's testimony freezes the courtroom. Rick never anticipated that a witness he had called would become a double-edged sword turning against him. Nina sits frozen, her face pale as she realizes the entire plan she had orchestrated is unraveling. Willow bows her head, too ashamed to look anyone in the eye. Drew sits beside her, his hand gripping the armrest, his eyes lost in a storm of suppressed anger. And Michael, who seemed to have collapsed, now looks at Sasha with gratitude and remorse. Amidst the rubble of trust and honor, a faint light is rekindled from the very woman he had hurt. This event is no longer just a custody battle. It has become a confrontation between human nature and social masks, between loyalty and betrayal, between the past and the present. And at the center, Michael, the one who seemed to be defeated, now stands to be saved by the very woman who was once his victim. Sasha not only defends Michael but also raises a question for the entire community. Can we forgive someone who has made mistakes but is willing to atone for them? And more importantly, can justice accept a truth that is more complex than the law has acknowledged? While Rick and Nina have not yet given up on their final gambit, the storm they have created has now shifted direction. And when it all ends, no one in that courtroom will leave without carrying a wound, but perhaps, from these very wounds, a new truth will emerge. Sasha steps up to the witness stand with an unusually calm expression, as though she has been carrying a storm in her chest, and now it is time for it to burst out. The courtroom is packed. All eyes on her, a woman once crushed by scandal, doubted and despised, now at the center of the legal earthquake that will determine the future of 2 children and 3 lives. Without a word of preamble, Sasha speaks clearly, each word ringing out in the silent space. Michael is the father of the child I am carrying. A real shockwave spread across the courtroom. Diane freezes, her pen dropping from her hand. Willow grips the chair, her face turning white as she hears the unexpected. Carly sits behind, her eyes wide in stunned silence. And Rick, the one who thought he was controlling everything, slightly tilts his head, as though he cannot believe his own ears. Nina, who had hoped Sasha would expose Michael, is now stunned as she realizes this attack is going in a completely uncontrollable direction. However, Sasha does not stop there. Her eyes quietly scan each person before settling on Drew. In a surprising twist, she begins to recount what she knew, what she had witnessed in times that seemed long past. Drew and Nina, not just legal allies, but lovers in secret. Sasha recounts the nights they left the office together, the times Nina stayed overnight at the old Corinthos hotel, the hurriedly deleted messages, the secret touches no one thought they could see. And then her voice drops, full of regret, as she speaks of Willow. Sasha does not hide the fact that she once believed in the pure love between Willow and Drew, 2 people who seemed to be healing from brokenness. But she had seen the pattern repeat. Drew, who had promised Willow, had secretly been with Nina. And now, in a strange twist of fate, Sasha is forced to reveal that during the time Michael returned from Germany, she had caught Drew and Willow in an intimate moment at the penthouse north of Port Charles, a moment that could only be explained by one word: betrayal. The courtroom falls silent. Willow, who had always believed she was the victim in this battle, is now cast into the role of the third party. Drew, the man once seen as the ideal father replacement, now reveals his true face as a two-faced man, playing both sides, creating a moral image to gain custody while hiding his own immoral relationships behind the scenes. The judge sets down the pen, his gaze shifting from Rick to Nina, and then landing on Drew. An unmistakable sense of disappointment fills the courtroom. All the evidence Rick had presented before, the facts about Michael, his responsibilities as a father, his past mistakes, now seemed pale compared to what was being revealed about the other side. Diane quickly rises, requesting a recess to review the new evidence. While Sasha, after everything, silently steps down from the witness stand as if she had just restored the balance of justice to its neutral position. Rick, exposed by his own witness, has no way of turning things around. Nina sits in a daze, unable to hide any longer. Willow quietly breaks down in tears, not because she was exposed, but because her trust had been betrayed. And Michael, the one who seemed to have lost everything, now stands as the only person in the courtroom not further exposed. The fact that he is the father of Sasha's child is a shock, but also proof that he has not abandoned his responsibilities. Sasha, with just one testimony, has turned the tide. From a woman who was driven to the brink, she becomes the key witness, opening the door to the truth for everyone to face. But no one understands better than her that the cost of the truth is too high. She has lost her privacy, must live with scrutinizing eyes, and most importantly, must protect a child in a world gone mad with ambition and hatred. But it is for this reason that Sasha becomes a symbol of a painful yet necessary truth. That no one has the right to take a child unless they have the courage to face their own truth. And sometimes, in order to protect someone, one must sacrifice honor, love, and peace, to preserve what remains of humanity in a deadly game of power that everyone wants to win. Sasha was no longer a passive witness dragged into a legal whirlwind. She had become the focal point of the entire battle unfolding in the courtroom, not just the center of attention for the media, the judge, and the disputing parties, but also the only person daring to shatter the facade that Rick and Nina had built, exposing it with brutal and unrelenting truth. When she took the witness stand for the second time, the atmosphere in the room immediately shifted. No one saw her as a weak woman, easy to convince or manipulate anymore. On the contrary, all eyes were fixed on her, waiting to see how many layers of masks she would rip off today, those everyone had been desperately trying to hold on to. She began with a cold but sharp declaration. Nina didn't care about her granddaughter. She was only interested in controlling the lives of those who had rejected her atonement. The sweet words Nina had said to Sasha. The visits to her home with gifts, the idealistic visions of a reunited family, it was all just a manipulation tool. Sasha recounted, in detail, every conversation where Nina had tried to influence her emotions, pressuring her to testify against Michael, to push him out of her child's life to satisfy her thirst for power. But it was Rick who really froze the blood in the courtroom. Sasha had no hesitation pointing out that it was Rick who had pushed her to her limit. He had threatened to expose her psychological treatment records. Even bringing up the accident that almost killed her, all just to force her to testify that Michael was irresponsible and a threat to children's development. Rick, once known as a lawyer of integrity, now revealed his true face as a manipulator, willing to destroy a pregnant woman's life to win. The tension in the room was palpable. Carly clenched her fists, her face no longer angry but full of intense worry. Willow turned away, as if unable to face the truth. Drew, who had seemed innocent, was now also exposed by Sasha. In a mix of fury and despair, she recalled the secret meetings she had witnessed between Drew and Nina, meetings that were never recorded in the calendar. The intimate signs she thought were just her imagination were now confirmed by the whispered words and hand touches between them in the town hall office. But the final blow came when Sasha revealed that she had overheard a conversation between Drew and Willow, where they discussed how to separate Michael from his children, setting the stage for a new, clean, and stable life. By flipping the entire chessboard, Sasha had turned Rick and Nina into the ones being judged for their morals, no longer the ones judging others. The legal schemes they had tried to carry out were now being scrutinized under the light of truth, and piece by piece, they were falling apart. The carefully laid plans, the legal attacks prepared over weeks, now appeared clumsy and weak before a woman who had nothing left to lose and no reason to fear. Sasha's brilliance wasn't in shouting or banging on the table, but in her unwavering consistency in her words, in how she calmly recounted everything, as if reading a sentence for those who thought they could win through manipulation. She didn't need to say much about herself because her very presence in court was the clearest proof that she had risen after everything. In the wave of change she had sparked, no one could hold on to their initial position. Rick bowed his head, sweat soaking his collar. Nina, once the unyielding wall, now looked like a broken shard of glass, irreparable. Willow was no longer sure who was an ally and who was an enemy. And Michael, who had once been on the brink, was now placed at the center, not because he was perfect, but because he was the only one who hadn't tried to twist the truth. Sasha didn't just break the game, she reshaped the entire nature of the battle. She showed that justice didn't come from the person with the best lawyer or the most powerful connections, but from the person brave enough to face the truth, even when that truth was painful and self-harming. And with that courage, Sasha didn't just save Michael. She made poor Charles look into the mirror, to see that pretense, no matter how skillfully cloaked, could not survive in the light of what is right. In the end, Rick was forced to face the bitter defeat of a truth he couldn't control, couldn't bend, and couldn't silence. His legal tricks, his manipulation of witnesses, and his covert collaboration with Nina were all publicly exposed, undeniable. He had once believed he was playing a power game with perfect moves, that he could control the custody battle the way he wanted. But he had underestimated one thing, the power of a woman pushed to the edge, carrying an unborn child and the courage of someone who had been thrown into the abyss but still didn't fall. Sasha had turned the tables. And now Rick was the one buried under the ruins of his own schemes. This defeat wasn't just a blow to Rick's career, it was a blow to his conscience, if he still had any left. His use of personal medical records, his threats against a pregnant woman, his exploitation of Sasha's psychological weaknesses to serve his vile plan had crossed every moral line. But the cruelty didn't stop there. During the days Sasha had to endure psychological pressure, rapid-fire questions, and suspicious looks from the public and media after the trial. Something unexpected happened, she began feeling unusual, dull pain. And then, one evening at General Hospital, while lying down from dizziness and exhaustion, Sasha suddenly collapsed in intense pain and fainted in her hospital room. The doctors rushed in, urgently performing emergency procedures. But the whispers from the head obstetrician left everyone in the room stunned. Sasha had miscarried. The nightmare that had just begun to fade was now suddenly struck back with the force of a deadly storm. Sasha, the woman who had bravely spoken the truth, was now the one paying with the life of the child she had placed all her hopes on. News spread like wildfire across Port Charles, sparking a furious public outcry. Carly cried in pain, Michael collapsed upon hearing the news, while Nina, no matter how angry, could only stare into the void with empty eyes, realizing her role in the chain of events that led to this tragedy. And Rick, standing amidst the waves of anger, could no longer deny anything. The threatening calls, the mental pressure, and the inhumane exploitation of Sasha's past trauma were now being seen as a series of actions constituting serious psychological harm leading to physical consequences. The ethics committee of lawyers got involved. Women's rights organizations raised their voices. An independent investigation was launched. And Rick, once proud of himself as a symbol of justice, was now a symbol of a corrupt legal system, using power to destroy rather than protect. The disaster that Sasha had to bear became a wake-up call for the entire town. Those who had stayed silent, who had stood on the sidelines, now had to face the truth that silence and complicity could kill hope, could kill a life not yet born. Michael, after the shock of losing his child, declared he would give up all custody rights if that meant his children would have to live under such a ruthless system. Willow could no longer harbor her anger toward Sasha. Instead, she was filled with guilt, realizing that she, too, had been part of the invisible pressure weighing down on that woman. And Sasha, when she awoke, frail and weak, had no tears left to cry. But her gaze was no longer desperate. It was frighteningly calm, as if she had crossed the line between suffering and resurrection. She had lost her child, lost most of herself. But the one thing she hadn't lost was the truth. And now, that very truth would live on as an indictment. Not only aimed at Rick but at all those who dared to hide their crimes under the guise of justice. Port Charles would never forget this disaster. And from those ashes, a new order might arise, one where justice would no longer be a privilege of the powerful, but the result of courage, resilience, and above all, the souls who sacrificed for what was right. Michael was slowly slipping into an abyss he had never prepared for. From the moment he heard the news that Sasha had lost their child, the world inside him seemed to come to a standstill. The baby, a symbol of a new beginning, a flicker of hope amidst the ruins of legal battles and deceitful betrayals, now existed only as a memory that had never been. Michael didn't cry, didn't scream. He just stood there, silent, his vacant eyes gazing out at the hazy Port Charles horizon through the hospital window. But inside him, a real storm was brewing, a storm of rage, loss, hatred, and obsession. Rick, once a respected lawyer, was now, in Michael's eyes, the man who had killed his child with a pen and cold legal maneuvers. Rick hadn't used a gun, hadn't taken any physical action, but it was him who had suffocated Sasha's spirit day by day with threats, phone calls, and pressure to make her testify against Michael. He did it all in the name of seeking justice for Willow, but now, who would seek justice for an innocent life that had been deprived of the chance to enter this world? As for Nina, the grandmother of his children, who had sworn that everything she did was for family, now she was exposed as a two-faced woman, using both her daughter and granddaughter to serve her need for control and vengeance. Michael recalled every sweet word Nina had whispered to Sasha, promising peace if she did the right thing. Now, Michael understood what right meant to Nina, to eliminate anyone who threatened her position in the Corinthos family, even if that person was pregnant. The promises, the smiles, the time she had appeared in court pretending to empathize with Sasha's pain, it was all just a cruel mask of a woman willing to sacrifice anyone to claim victory. In Michael's mind, each event from the past weeks replayed, but now under a different light, cold, dark, and full of warnings he had ignored. The times Sasha had texted him asking to meet but then cancelled. Her silent tears in the hospital hallway. The panic attacks in the middle of the night that Michael had thought were just psychological after-effects. Now he understood, it was all part of a systematic mental assault that Rick and Nina had silently orchestrated. Michael was no longer the man he once was, the man of compromises, of restraint, of principles. Now, he was a father who had lost his child, a man stripped of the chance to love a life he had never been able to hold in his arms. And that had awakened a new version of him, stronger, reckless, and dangerous. He no longer believed in courts. He no longer believed in goodness. He only believed in the truth and loyalty, and he was ready to do whatever it took to seek justice on his own terms. The obsession Michael was experiencing was no longer something he could hide. It showed in every glance, every step, every handshake. Those who had once sided with his opponents now began to feel uneasy. Rick, though pretending to remain calm, could feel the cold gaze from Michael during the next trial. Nina, though always knowing how to evade, began to feel nervous when she heard Michael was quietly hiring a private investigator to gather evidence of her and Rick's witness manipulation. Willow was confused. She couldn't recognize the man she had once loved, who he was turning into. Carly, for the first time in years, didn't dare stop her son, because this time she knew that if anyone could survive this pain, it would only be Michael, no one else. The dark obsession building in Michael was something no one could extinguish, unless the truth was revealed. Justice restored, and those who had caused this tragedy were punished. But was poor Charles ready for the storm Michael was about to bring? Or would the entire town have to pay the price when a grieving father decided to show no mercy to anyone involved in his tragedy? Nina is going through a deep emotional crisis as the truth about the consequences of her actions finally becomes undeniable. 4 weeks. Nina has quietly watched the custody trial between Michael and Willow, trying to manipulate the scenes by feeding information to Rick, goading Sasha into testifying, and playing the role of a mother and grandmother who only wants what's best for the family. But when the news breaks, Sasha has lost her unborn child after a series of horrific emotional traumas in which Nina herself was a key part. Every layer of her carefully crafted facade collapses in an instant. For the first time in a long time, Nina can't find a reason to justify herself. There's no family, no blame for the circumstances, no blame for Michael or Carly or anyone else. She's left with herself, alone, racked with guilt. The image of Sasha lying motionless on the hospital bed, the last tear silently falling from the corner of that woman's eye before losing her child, was something Nina would never forget. And when she entered the hospital room hoping to say an apology, Sasha turned away, not a glance, not a word in response. Nina was someone who had experienced pain, had lost a child, had been robbed of the chance to be a mother for decades. But it was she, the one who understood the cruelty of losing a child, who had pushed Sasha into that hell. That realization made Nina feel suffocated in the days that followed. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't face her face in the mirror every morning. The whispers in town about the woman who manipulated a trial to the point of causing a child to die were the truest reflection of what she had sown. And worst of all, deep down, Nina knew they were right. Nina's remorse was not a fleeting moment of emotion. It was a long, painful journey, where she began to look back at every choice she had made, from giving information to Rick, to pushing Sasha, to turning a blind eye to the fear in the girl's eyes. She remembered her last conversation with Sasha, when Sasha had whispered, "I'm not sure I can take this anymore." And instead of stopping, Nina had just said, "You're stronger than you think." She understood now that those words were not encouragement, but a death sentence for a life that had not yet cried its first cry. That regret was eating away at Nina every hour. She couldn't go back, couldn't fix it, couldn't save it. She could beg for forgiveness, but even she herself wasn't sure if she deserved it. Standing before the picture of the unnamed child, the smoke from the small candle fading in the draft from the hospital window, Nina could only whisper 3 words she had never dared to say before. "I'm sorry." And that's when Nina truly understood. Sometimes, the scariest thing is not losing the people you love, but realizing that you made them lose everything.